Christy, and welcome again, everybody. Good morning. Let's see, what are we going to next here? So, we're going to talk about life, we're going to talk about meaning, we're going to talk about work, and we're going to start, though, with a little pause, because we're going to just take a moment to remember what today is. 9/11. And I think for most of us here in the sanctuary anyway, we all remember where we were, what was happening, how we experienced 9/11. I read recently that for everyone who was alive on that day, it's one of the sort of top 10 historical moments and experiences of their lives. It was a day, as Christy alluded to, when we kind of lost some innocence. Although it was an innocence that we were very privileged to have because people around the world have been experiencing things like this for a long time. But I want to go beyond just recognizing what this day is an anniversary of, a terrible and brutal experience where thousands of people died, because it was also a day where there was an incredible outpouring of service, of unity, of sacrifice on the part of the people who were there, people who are both sung and unsung, right? We all know the first responders, but there were many, many people who were just present, who did all that they could. And I have to admit, I kind of forgot myself that in 2009, Congress actually passed a law recognizing 9/11 as a day of service. And in this moment in our country's history, where things seem so divided, it's kind of easy to forget that dimension of this day. There's actually an organization called 9/11 Day of Service, and they help to sponsor events and activities on 9/11, and these are a couple of photos from events that they have sponsored. One of them is of people putting together lunches and meals in New York City to be distributed to hundreds of thousands of people. Another is, as that young girl is doing, writing thank you notes for people who are first responders, veterans, people in service in many ways. And so I just want to take this moment first to recognize everybody who engages in service, and there are myriad ways I know that that happens and that people here in this room are doing, as well as people who are joining us online and all over our country. And to simply affirm that service, that desire to be of service as a really fundamental part of who we are as human beings, and a really beautiful aspect of how the divine acts through us. So I invite you today, on this day, to recognize that service in the people around you, and to recognize it in yourself as something that's beautiful and to be supported. So, in recognizing who we are, I want to share some ideas with you about how we choose to live, kind of exploring this idea that we have as our topic for this month, which is work. Now, it's almost kind of ironic to talk about work as something great. I know that I have not always lived my life feeling like work is something I want to celebrate, right? Labor, right? Vacation, great. Labor, not always so much. But our theme for this year is living in everyday wonder. And the opportunity that that gives us is to direct our curiosity and our wonder to everything that we do in our lives. And work, of course, is a really fundamental element of our lives. And I don't mean work in the sense of a job, though it might be job. I mean work in the sense of vocation. So let's talk about that a little bit. So in the Center for Spiritual Living Global Vision, Global Heart Vision, which was actually a vision that was created before the two organizations that now are Centers for Spiritual Living came back together, we have a really beautiful statement. It is, we envision humanity awakening to its spiritual magnificence and discovering the creative power of thought. A world where each and every person discovers his or her own personal power and ability to create an individual life that works within a world that works for everyone. Wow, those are some powerful words, aren't they? And in our teaching, we typically think about this idea of our own spiritual power as being an expression of God, of the divine, and our work, our journey in life as kind of waking up to this, learning the tools to make that happen, right? To be able to fully be the divine self that we are here to be. And I think we don't always think about where work fits into that. Vocation is a word that comes from the Latin vocare, which means voice. And so your vocation really comes from that voice within you, that voice that calls you to some activity, to some expression, right? Now, we don't live in a culture that really supports the idea of paying attention to that voice, do we? We live in a culture that supports us listening to our parents and our teachers and all of the authority figures that we might encounter. That could be your minister, no disrespect, Reverend Suzette and Reverend Jerry. Of course, we listen to you. But the point is, we put our attention to all of the sources outside of us. Rather than listening, or rather than affirming, kind of as a social value, listening to that voice inside, right? So, but where does that idea of vocation come from, that sense of what is really ours to do? Now, some people have that sense right away in life. My brother, when he was 6 years old, announced that he was going to be a doctor. And he is, now at 60 plus, a doctor. He was unwavering. He heard his voice. He went to it. Other people, myself included, feel like, sort of wandering around in life, right? Oh, I'll turn this way for a while. No, I think I'll turn that way for a while. And yet, I've discovered actually that there was a through line to that, but I'll tell you more about that. So we're spiritual beings living a spiritual experience 24/7, 365 days of the year. Do you feel spiritual when you do your work? Does anybody feel spiritual when they go to work? A few people. That's great. Do you feel spiritual all the time at work? No, me neither. Maybe and there's the opportunity. Because it's partly about paying attention, isn't it? It's partly about being curious, expressing that wonder. As we look at our tasks, as we think about what we are doing in motion, I want to share another idea. So Ernest Holmes, founder of Science of Mind, and one of his collaborators, Willis Kinnear, shared this idea. God is ever going forth into new expression, and every word we speak, every thought we think, is the further creative activity of God at the level of our expression of God. So it's a journey, right? We are constantly evolving and expanding. We are figuring out what our expression is, our understanding is at any given moment. So every day is an opportunity to go a little further and deeper in that. But where are we looking for that experience? Are we observing it within ourselves? Are we waiting for recognition from other people about what that is? I know that I certainly waited as a young person and well into my adulthood for affirmation from other people. And I might have an idea of what I was interested in or engaged by, but I was always looking for someone else to tell me I was doing a good job or I was on the right track, something like that. Parker Palmer, who is a thinker, I think I skipped his thing. Well, we'll get back, we'll go back. Here we go, and we'll go back to that picture. He says, before you can tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you. he goes on to say, before you tell your life what truths and values you have decided to live up to, let your life tell you what truths you embody and what values you represent. So coming back to the idea of what is inside, waiting to be expressed, and learning how to listen to that. What do you think it would be like if we all learned that lesson when we went to elementary school? We might have a very different experience of life. So here's a young man. I'm going to go back now to tell you a little story about. His name is Devin Rodriguez. He grew up in the Bronx, in a poor neighborhood in New York, and he had a desire and a sort of burning ambition to work in graphic arts. And he drew all the time. And in fact, he tried to get into a special school for the arts in New York, and he did not get in. And he was very discouraged. And he was going to high school, public high school in New York, and he told his art teacher about it. And his art teacher said, hey, why don't you bring me your drawings? Show me your portfolio. Let's see what we can do. And so he started working with his teacher, and after a little while, his teacher really helped him work, especially on portraits, was something he really liked. So he rode the subway, of course, because he lived in New York, and if you live in New York, you often spend a lot of time on the subway. It could even be hours a day. So he started drawing people. This is one of his drawings. He would just draw whoever he encountered. And what's really powerful about this, and I don't know if any of you have encountered his work on social media, on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, because what he does is he gives his drawings to the subjects. And if you've ever seen any of the videos of this, people react with joy and surprise and astonishment because they feel seen. He draws them with such accuracy and love that is so evident in the drawings. They feel seen, and isn't that what we all want? And he's been able to do a lot of things now with his art, but this is still a gift that he offers. It is a gift that is in him and that he offers to others. And to me, this is really a kind of epitome of vocation and work that has meaning and that matters, right? Because it brings together both what you do to fulfill yourself, to be fully and authentically yourself, and also how you are responding to a deep need in human beings. In this case, to be seen, to be known. So, here is one example that comes from listening to yourself and choosing to move forward. I'm going to tell you another story that comes from really listening to a need that comes from other people. So did anybody watch 60 Minutes last week? Yes, I see a couple nods. Did anybody watch 60 Minutes last week, the show? So there was a segment on 60 Minutes last week, which evidently was actually a replay, had been originally broadcast last year. But it was about an architect named Michael Murphy. And Michael Murphy has, with other collaborators, created a new model of architecture. That's called modern, let's see, what's it called? It is called Model of Architecture Serving Society, or MASS, M-A-S-S. And Michael Murphy, his father is actually an architect, but he didn't grow up thinking he wanted to do that. He went to college, and while he was in school, his father came down with cancer. So he left school and went home to spend some time with his family. And while he was at home with his father, they began doing a kind of a home renovation project as something to help his father focus on. And after a year of being home, his father recovered, and Michael decided he wanted to become an architect. And he went to architecture school, and one day he met a doctor who worked in public health in Africa. And the doctor was talking about all of the challenges and difficulties that they had being able to build sustainably in Africa, and in Rwanda in particular, where this doctor worked. And he kind of threw it out there as a challenge to these students to design something that would actually be functional in an environment with very limited resources, both of materials and of machinery and technology. And so he and his fellow students attempted something, were not successful. He decided he had to go live in Africa to see if he could figure this out. So he went to live in Rwanda for a year. And eventually they came up with a concept for this first project, which was a hospital. And one of the challenges that they had was that there was no heavy machinery to build a foundation. So they enlisted everyone in the surrounding area to help them dig the foundation by hand. And then they discovered that there were materials that were being discarded by farmers, volcanic stone that was actually in the way of farming. So they used that to build the building. And they discovered a passive way to design airflow in the hospital. And all of this is to say that they came up with a way to meet the needs of people by expressing their own creative gifts. And this group has now gone on to do projects all over Africa and all over the world. But in this moment of accepting the challenge, right, there is again that intersection of that creative desire and intention coming through somebody and the intersection with need. I don't know about you, I find this very inspirational. Yeah? Do you too? So these are some examples of this idea of living, following your vocation, following the voice, right? And it's something that we can all be doing at any time. And not only in our jobs, but in all the different kinds of activities that we do. There's a story that the Jewish philosopher and mystic Martin Buber tells of a Hasidic rabbi who, after death, found himself at the seat of judgment and was waiting for God to come and judge him. And while he was there, he started to worry. He thought, wow, what if God says, why weren't you like Moses? And then he started worrying, well, what if God says, why weren't you like Solomon? And then he worried, oh no, what if God says, why weren't you like David? Right, all the biblical figures and heroes. And then finally, when God appears, what God says to him is, why weren't you Zeusya? Zeusya, it was his name. Why weren't you yourself? So rather than trying to be all the different people that you could be, that someone else would like you to be, or that you imagine someone else would like you to be, why not choose to be yourself? Recognizing that we don't only have one gift, we have many, right? And we can choose to bring those forward into expression. We can choose to be that vehicle for the divine that has placed those talents and desires within us. How do we do this? I think in a couple of ways. We use this faculty of wonder that we have, and we also accept this idea that we have the power of intuition, right? Let's see. This is a fundamental belief of our teaching. We believe in the direct revelation of truth through our intuitive and spiritual nature, and that anyone may become a revealer of truth who, this should be, lives in close contact with the indwelling God. Loves it too, of course. Through our intuitive nature, we can know the truth of who we are, and then we can choose to act on that truth. I want to invite you to do something this week as you go through your week. I want to invite you to reflect on your own life right now. Are you expressing that voice that you hear within yourself? And if you are, wonderful. If you're not, I invite you to be curious about that. Think about how you might. And if you are, then maybe how might you support that in somebody else? Somebody that's close to you. Somebody that you care about. Because that's also an important opportunity that we have, isn't it? To support others in this same journey. If we are wise, we will study our life. We will reflect on it. We will think about all of the lessons that we can learn from that. We will listen for that voice, because within the heart of humanity, within our own hearts, that voice is always speaking to us first, to remind us of who we are. And then it reminds us of the world of work. And then it speaks through us. I've mentioned this idea, that place where your deep gladness meets the world's deep need. This is an idea expressed by Frederick Buechner. That definition starts with the self, and then it moves out into the world. It takes that deep joy, that spiritual power that is within us, out to enrich and enliven the world all around us. Each and every one of us has that capability, that potential, that power to express that in service, not only on a day like this, 9/11, where we recognize the service and the sacrifice of other people, but really to do that every single day. And in so doing, to create a life of meaning. I don't think we have to create a life that matters. I think we all matter all the time. We're always in a life that matters. But we can always choose to create a life of deeper meaning for ourselves and for everybody else. So I've already mentioned our practice. So I want, in closing, to invite you to join me in this affirmation. And we're going to say it this way and a little bit differently too. So we're going to start with the work of my soul is creating a life that matters. And then we're going to say the work of my soul is creating a life of meaning. Okay? So I'm going to invite you to join me in saying the first one 3 times, and then we'll say the second one 3 times, because we always like this 3-time thing, right? So we're going to whisper it, speak it, and then really affirm it, okay? All right, so let's go. The work of my soul is creating a life that matters. The work of my soul is creating a life that matters. The work of my soul is creating a life that matters. Okay, one more time. The work of my soul is creating a life of meaning. The work of my soul is creating a life of meaning. The work of my soul is creating a life of meaning. Thank you. All right, namaste.